when people come, and they want to go on a retreat with me, often there is a pull to solve a crisis with psychedelics. I'm like, this is not the medicine for the crisis. If you're going through something really intense, go through it. Like, don't try to shortcut yourself, through that portal. Go through it. Be it, sometimes it can be divorce, it can be death. And then once you're on the other side, once it's time to heal and once there is space for it, that's when there could be a place for psychedelics. Again, keeping in mind, is just one of the ways. It's not a better way. There's many paths to the top of the mountain. Psychedelics is definitely not everybody's cup of tea. I don't advocate everybody working with them. It's just one of the ways, and it has pros and cons as any other modality.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Today, we have this amazing two guests in the house, Mariya Garnet and Lee Kaiser. Welcome both. Really, really a pleasure to have you. Mariya is joining me from Canada and Lee is joining me from Argentina. So this is a very precious gathering, especially a treat for our listeners. This is going to be a conversation around an event that is taking place on the 25th of February. It's titled When the Ceremony Doesn't End, Bridging Interdisciplinary Perspectives from Psychedelic-Induced Psychosis to Spiritual Emergency. And this is sponsored by the McKenna Academy, Dennis McKenna, Terence McKenna brothers. So our listeners probably familiar with the Academy, and Dennis McKenna, and then Terence McKenna, late Terence McKenna. So this is such a treat for us. So before we can dive in and understand a little bit about what are you guys sharing in this event, and what this event is, who's it for, who can join, and who can benefit from this event. We'll go into those questions and conversations. But before that, I'd like to get to know you both. And maybe we can start with Mariya. And tell us, how did you come into this work?
Hi, everybody. It all happens by chance, right? Psychedelics really, you rarely choose this path. It kind of almost comes to you. I was born and raised in Ukraine, and I immigrated to Canada when I was 18, and I was on a path of becoming an artist. I was a filmmaker, building successful career in that path when I encountered ayahuasca at a very young age of 25. I'm 42 now. And literally, well, the thing that you do when you're 25, I dropped my career, I dropped everything that I was doing, and I moved to Peru, where I thought I would stay for 6 months, but I ended up living for 8 years, full-time, apprenticing with traditional curanderos, healers. In 2013, I co-founded my own treehouse healing center, where I actually met Lee for the first time. And in 2017, I gave priority to my family. I became a wife and a mother, and I moved to Canada again, where I went back to school, and am right now in a graduate school, becoming an expressive art psychotherapist, which in my opinion is really a perfect kind of profession, the type of psychotherapy that really bridges the traditional and original psychotherapies, such as traditional use of psychedelic plants, with Western kind of understanding of mind, and it's really suited for really this interdisciplinary bridging of these two paradigms. So I find myself in a very unique position to be able to kind of stand one leg in each world and to be able to speak to both perspectives. That's how I am here.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love the constant, it's almost like this consistent theme that we always have with our guests, that they always come to medicine by chance. right? It's always this unexpected, suddenly they found themselves in this work. So that's also very special. Thank you so much, Mariya. And you have a very extensive background in lots of different holistic modalities and traditions, and you'll be speaking at this event. So you'll be a speaker, one of the speakers, right?
Yes. Well, I see my role as a facilitator, and I will be, because I have interviewed my teacher, Enrique Paredes, for this event. So I'm featured in a conversation with him, and I will be like, I'm sort of kind of a spokesperson for my teacher and for the indigenous perspectives. And I believe that, I have a great kind of positionality to be able to speak to independent practitioners, integration coaches, and retreat facilitators. So if we kind of circle back to the event itself and who it is for, really this subject is interesting to anybody. It can be for general public. There are lots of people right now discovering psychedelics and doing it on their own. That is just the reality. There is, retreats and independent practitioners, and there is a psychedelic-assisted therapists. All of us are working in that field, and while we have different approaches, we're working, with the same phenomena, right? So it's just different ways of looking, but each side kind of has something to learn from the other. Right. The clinicians can really learn a lot from the traditional facilitators, and, retreat holders, should also be aware of the medical system reality. So in this event, we're really trying to find the common language. Where can we coming together? So in that, so that will be my role during the event, to try to kind of bring us all together.
That's amazing. It's very powerful, especially right now with medicines going mainstream, as you both were probably fully aware and being in the space. Very timely indeed. So thank you so much, Mariya. So I would like to check in with Lee. And Lee, tell us what brings you to this work and a little bit of your background, maybe your also role in the event.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. My name is Lee Kaiser, and what brings me to this work and the medicine space, kind of like you both referred to, of just the chance opportunities, where this comes up on our radar and becomes a part of our world. I was doing a lot of sweat lodge ceremonies and learning from some traditional elders about kind of the Lakota and Nipi traditions when I was living in Colorado, and I started to hear a little bit more about ceremonial rituals and practices and ayahuasca. The ceremonial aspect around the use of ayahuasca was something that particularly came up for me as a point of interest. And when I was traveling, just backpacking in Peru for several months, I'm a wildlife biologist by education, and I spent a lot of time traveling as well in my life for work and also for pleasure. And I signed up for a retreat that Mariya shared about, how she founded and helped build a retreat center in Peru. And I was a ceremonial participant, a retreat participant for 2 weeks I think it was in late August, early May of 2014. And so my experiences opened up my world to a lot of things there through that retreat. It was something very new for me. I didn't have any experience recreationally or previous to my ceremonial experience and retreat experience with medicines or psychedelics. And so it was something that was a very intense, eye-opening, reality-altering process for me. And so that brought me to a lifestyle that included some of these practices and rituals and processes that called to me on a deep level in many ways. And this brought me to go through some very challenging experiences, which everyone who has gone through healing processes in any form, and also particularly with the medicines and psychedelic compounds, we all know that there are challenges and there can become difficult experiences that are part of these healing processes. And so in some of those experiences, I went through sort of break with reality, I guess would be a good way to call it. Kind of just altered my psyche, and I sort of stayed in a prolonged state of altered consciousness where I didn't fully come back to reality in some ways. And so through those experiences and keeping in contact with Mariya and our personal relationship, and getting to know her over the years, and receiving her support and her being involved at times, and being aware of my lifestyle and my work with the different medicines and my path, my experiences. At one point, this kind of came up to us through Mariya and I kind of checking in with one another. And I had gotten this feedback from several people. Also, Dennis McKenna, someone you had mentioned, is kind of an elder of mine, someone who I've looked up to a lot and gotten to know a little bit over the past 7 or 8 years, getting to know him. And several people had recommended to me to find some way to share a little bit about this through writing or through some sort of storytelling, or also through my contacts more involved in clinical and therapeutic practices, to share in some way as like a constructive kind of educational format. And so that brought me to participate in this and helping Mariya organize it a little bit. As she said, she's going to be kind of moderating and facilitating and overseeing a lot of things, and really important her role, and also Dennis and his presence, the McKenna Academy, their support. And we have a psychiatrist and a doctor of psychology, a clinical psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker as well, who are all going to be speaking on that panel. And so I'm coming kind of bringing a testimonial, bringing some personal stories and experiences in the context or with the intention of trying to use this as educational material and learn more about these types of challenges and extreme circumstances, more sort of emergency cases or situations where people have to consider more extreme interventions, and especially related to psychiatry. So that's a little bit about kind of my background, where I'm coming from, and why I'm involved in this.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This is so valuable, guys. You have no idea. Especially lately, I am fully aware that there are some journalism is happening, right? You probably know around the spiritual emergencies. Let's say maybe a psychedelic-induced psychosis, or breaking open. There is a whole book around that, and I was really appreciating the conference that we had in the UK, led by a couple of psychologists and a few coaches and therapists, by a journalist. And so this is a big, huge topic, and obviously without revealing too much, I would love to maybe touch on a little bit about the main focus, which is on your event. It says this event will feature mental health practitioners, traditional wisdom keepers, teachers, and facilitators exploring the intricate relationship between psychedelics and psychosis in various settings. I think this will be so valuable to define or maybe clarify for our listeners. How often does it happen? It does happen. Because at the moment, we're also going through this, revival, psychedelic revival, where almost kind of there are so many of us want to kind of lean into the promotional side of it. We just want this to be here now. And inevitably, because there is so much suffering. And if either of you, or both, maybe you can tell us a bit about this.
With pleasure. So 2 questions here. I'll start with the main focus. While preparing for this event, we've realized how little research there is on the subject. We have an amazing researcher on our panel who specializes in psychosis, and that was her answer. We asked her a question, and she's like, "Well, we have no research data on it. We have no research data on that." So I think we are approaching this seminar with first introducing the subject, introducing some terminology, speaking about psychosis, speaking about spiritual emergency, looking at Lee's case. And what's really exciting for me is the experiential part of the seminar, because I'm bringing some expressive art-based activities in which every participant will participate in order to find the answers, all together. So it's not really that kind of, lecture style seminar where, we say what is and we tell you what to do and this is that. No, this is really a process of discovery where by having such a diverse panel and by including perspectives from, different disciplines, we can together, through, kind of by descending into this liminal space through the art, which is very similar to the space we enter in psychedelics, it's going into the unknown. So, it's not even about revealing too much. I don't know what is going to reveal itself, right? We're creating a space where new ideas can come, right? Where, we can, even start asking differently questions, or present the subject from differently. So the main focus would be how can we support our patients or clients going through such an experience better, right? I think, for every, healthcare provider, for every healer, coach, therapist, we want to make this experience, well, I don't know if we can make it less challenging, but we want to be able to support people going through this better. And the more people are using plant medicines in a ceremonial context, the more of them are going to be faced with medical systems. So the medical system needs to be aware that this is what's happening and this is a kind of care this kind of patients might benefit from. And then, the independent practitioners and retreat facilitators also will be faced, there is an influx, right? So just statistically, the numbers are going to be going up of, this kind of accidents happening. So also, retreat facilitators also need to be aware, what can we do? When do we need to involve doctors and like hospital help, like when and how to advocate for our clients within the medical system, right? It is about integration and collaboration. It's not really competition, who knows it better, but it's a very complex, phenomena, and we need to become friends. We have to make circles and squares dance, as I like to say. So I guess that leads me to the second question: how often does it happen? Again, there is no research data. It doesn't happen often, but it's an extreme enough event that when it happens, it's life-altering for both the client and the therapist. It really is an experience through which we go together. If you are a facilitator and something like this is happening to somebody in your circle, you are there with them. It's a together journey. So it will happen. We often think that we can prevent, through the intake, through the questionnaire, and yes, it's a crucial step, but sometimes people don't know their histories, right? Somebody's adopted, let's say. Sometimes people don't reveal everything. So I wouldn't just, rule out the possibility of this happening. So if this happens in your work, and if you work long enough and you have enough clients, at some point it will likely happen. So what you're going to do?
Exactly. This is so valuable, Mariya. Before we touch base with Lee, I just wanted to reinforce and highlight what you just said there. Sometimes, especially with the medical processing, there is a lot of leveraging on the screening process. There's a whole arduous process of like accepting people into the medicine work and so on and so forth for the, harm reduction, ethics, and being very authentic about this whole process. But like you said, sometimes, I think it's helpful to see this happening as a maybe invitation, like invitation to healing. And I'm sure, like I spoke to many indigenous healers, and they also seem to, through their language, see this as an invitation, maybe, such as Dr. Stan Grof would probably say the same thing, right? It's a breaking open into a new reality so that the person, maybe this was their way of healing process. So I love that you said it, because we can never know, and it can always happen despite having such a long processes of the screening, right? So I think that's very valuable. And for our listeners as well, there's always a possibility and a chance that this could happen to anyone. Is that
Yeah.
correct to say?
Yeah, and maybe actually Lee can talk about his experience.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting points you both are touching on there, and that I would love to chime in about just from my own experiences personally, also in being a part of other people's lives who have gone through a lot of retreats and experiences on their own. And it is something that is very rare. Like Mariya said, there's not a lot of really good data. I haven't seen any studies or percentages that I would be comfortable being able to make that assessment, but I have talked with several psychologists who have told me they've never seen something like this in their own practice. It could be that it just hasn't come through their offices, their clinics, and to them directly. But I can say in the Western world, for most people who I've gotten feedback from or just checked in with this about, it's not something that does happen often. That being said, there have been several people I've talked to who have seen people go through this experience. And it also is something I think in particular we could go into a lot about ayahuasca specifically as a medicine, that perhaps there are some things that are more intensely reality altering. Each medicine is very potent and powerful and has its own kind of essence and characteristics about it. Those are things that Mariya could speak to in much more depth. Just from my experiences and background and the teachers I've worked with, the people who have different ceremonial tools and processes, any modality and any opportunity that somebody tries to make in their life to go through a big healing change, and can be a very big upheaval and can be traumatic and overwhelm a person. So I don't want to try and associate this too directly with ayahuasca, but again, from what I just have heard a little bit anecdotally, this is a little bit more likely to appear through people who have seen this with ayahuasca than other medicines. That being said, I went through one of my experiences. I had two incidents where this came up, and it is a distinct and unique disconnect from reality, where the word psychosis comes into it and how it's referred. There is something kind of categorically that is different and more drastic and severe in cases like this. There are a lot of traumatic processes, difficult experiences, moments where the alteration of consciousness after a ceremony or a session with a psychedelic compound can be a little destabilizing and leave the person who's going through that experience in a little bit of a disconnect in some way, or kind of a reprogramming or reorientation with reality. And I think, like you're just speaking to, Susan, how that can be a positive thing. It can be an opportunity. But to what extent is that disconnect coming up, and how far have we deviated from consensus reality, from our identity, from our structural sense of ego and who we are as a person? And that's where I think it's really important to differentiate there, and also to recognize how that process is in some way innate in all healing experiences and therapeutic openings, in some sense, to doing that emotional work, to if you're looking for spiritual growth or some sort of personal development, or working on yourself, or addressing difficult things from your past, those sort of things can come up. I think it just is much more likely with certain medicines in certain settings. And that's where, like Mariya was touching on, as people start to open up more to these modalities, these technologies and tools and compounds become more accessible also in other settings and beyond sort of where they come from originally. That's where this is, just by the sheer numbers, a little more likely to come up. Thankfully, though, I think it is something that not many people have to face, because it is a very life-shattering and traumatic and difficult thing for everyone involved. The people who are helping facilitate and care for the person's family and loved ones, people who are involved in all regards, and especially for the person going through it, obviously. That's a given. But I do want to emphasize that as well, as this is something that is a distinct kind of category of traumatic sort of healing upheaval and challenge facing, a person on an existential level, where we go through this a little bit, in many different circumstances, and opening up to these kind of experiences. but when it actually comes to this severity, yeah, I don't know if we have a lot of good numbers of what that percentage is. I would imagine it's less than 1 out of 1,000 people who have, ceremonial experiences throughout their life. But I'm just throwing that number out there. Maybe I should, maybe it's not prudent of me to say it, put a number to it, but yeah.
I love this. This is so valuable, both of you. Honestly, this is so valuable. So I've been around in the psychedelic circles for over 10 years now. And of course, I'm a bit of a geek, so I do talk to a lot of people, hence why the podcast. So in my personal experience, I think I met at least 10 people who had this similar experience, and I have them around me still. And in the circles that I was also exploring medicine, happened to us 2 times. And actually, yeah, so I'm very familiar with it actually. Then, maybe it is more, maybe it's out there that we just don't know how to bring it to our conversation, right? Because it could be. And I mean, look, I spoke to, there's one person that I know closely. He said he went to do a ayahuasca experience in Spain. It was done in sort of like a very nature-inspired field type of setting, and I think there was 50 people there, or maybe more than that. And then in the end, there was a couple of people started walking away from the circle that facilitators didn't notice, and then the securities or police or they were being picked up and they were completely not there. So yeah, also these experiences are out there, right?
Yeah, I'm curious. So are you talking about this happening during the ceremony or actually persisting afterwards for days and weeks?
Yeah, so I know people in my experience, when in one of my circle happened to somebody. So I saw it happen acutely in the session. And then I also kind of followed aftermath of what happened. I actually have my own little mini version with the ayahuasca too. I also had that little bit, this dissociation that lasted 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and when you said maybe this is pertaining to ayahuasca, I was kind of like peeking, like, oh, wow, that's interesting. That's also very interesting. Yeah. So what would you say, Mariya? Do you think ayahuasca has a little bit more to bringing this kind of induced psychosis, or?
Again, not a research or medical opinion. Well, ayahuasca, like that's why I was asking, like, was it something happening in ceremony or afterwards? Because in ceremony, that is kind of actually part of the experience, the complete, disconnect and ego dissolution. So that's and usually those experiences, if properly held, which 50 people in the circle wouldn't strike me as a well-held container, usually they become extremely transformative. So that would be, for example, a good example of spiritual emergence, right? Like where something emerges from you, where that dissociation and that dissolution of yourself has a distinct spiritual quality to it, where we can feel that we're even in communication with beings, entities, where usually how spiritual emergence or emergency differentiates from psychosis is that psychosis is usually much longer lasting. There is less coherence to it, right? There is usually an absence of that, being guided, or communicating with, higher beings. And usually that what will probably will be requiring some medical assistance. So if, you're talking that for the next 6 months, you were sort of altered like that, I would lean this more on a, that breaking, opening and inviting healing kind of side, right? Like you were able to still, well, you still had a life, right? You didn't have to be restrained for 6 months. So that is probably, and, I can, well, you can tell me if I'm right, like that probably actually led to some deep discoveries, right? So something emerged out of that experience, where straight up psychosis often it's more traumatic, and then the healing after, psychotic episode, that what can bring a much deeper healing in itself. So in a way, it is also a doorway. But I feel, from my perspective, I feel like they're a little bit different in qualities.
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would say mine was more like a reset than anything else. Yeah, still
Yeah.
functioning okay-ish, and then just kind of having that reset for sure. Lee, what would you say? What was it like? Was it terrifying? Was it complete, like, wilderness? Like you just kind of floating around? What was it like?
Yeah, this is a really hard question to give a very concise and short answer. But it is really important, and this is a big exercise of kind of what I'm going through, is being able to convey a little bit of what is it like, what did I live through. And I think that those insights and those reflections, the observations, the things that I did bring back with me and can convey is helpful information. And so that is important. I appreciate you asking that. I think also just building off of what you two were sharing about and your experience as well, Susan, personally, is there is a distinction there that Mariya is kind of pointing to, of it was you going through a really big shift and kind of in new waters, in new settings, or kind of going through a transformation, but it was still you. And that's where, when I disconnected, or what I went through and where it became an episode of psychosis, is I wasn't there at all in any real way. My partner, who I was with at the time, my closest friends who were supporting in the different situations, even my mother was around during one of these episodes, and a little bit when I was in the hospital at one point. They were not engaging with Lee. They were not engaging with the person who they knew. I wasn't eating or sleeping or taking care of my necessities or making sense. I wasn't coherent. What I experienced was essentially a blackout, in the sense of, I kind of embarrassingly, but just truthfully, had some experiences when I was a young man in university and consuming a lot of alcohol. And I had a couple of experiences when I consumed so much that I still was functional and behaving like normal. My friends interacted with me, but when in the following day, when we talked about kind of what we had done the night before, I didn't remember a lot of things, and they weren't interacting with me during that period. And we called it a blackout, that I had a blackout. That was something that happened. And so if people can relate to that in any ways, or just kind of, it was like a period when I didn't register memories. I do have some little snapshots and windows and recollections of a few sort of fleeting scenes and situations and things when I do recall how I was behaving, what I was saying and doing, but it didn't make sense. It wasn't coherently integrated into who I am. I wasn't there. It was like I was possessed a little bit. That's how some people lived that experience, and what they saw and how I was manifesting certain behaviors is it looked like a possession, like something else was kind of in control of me, my body, and how I was acting and what I was saying and doing. It was referred to by other people who were there with me in the process as like a Kundalini awakening. So this sort of spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency framework and vocabulary also, I think, is useful here. But my experience essentially is this: I was not in my body. I was not present. I just disconnected. I blacked out. And there were little times when I did kind of come back to the surface, and I did register, what was happening, but I wasn't able to convey, help me this is where I am, help me out in this certain way. This is what I need. I just was very gravely and dangerously disconnected from my psyche, my ego, my sense of identity, my whole reality. And so it was, categorically very different in that regard. It just was a very big disorientation. There were a lot of things that came before, leading up to this, that I was going through a lot of stressful and difficult personal challenges and transformative processes already on its own. And so it was kind of like a coming to the head, many different ingredients that sort of intensified upon one another. And the way that I was living my life and working with a lot of medicines, and always in a ceremonial setting and with an elder and a person who had the training and the authority and the background to be serving medicines to others, even though it was in this context. And I did have the participation, the oversight, getting feedback and checking in with people who were aware of how I was living, I was pushing things to an extreme a lot. And it was something that was a part of my life in a manner that became a little bit irresponsible. And that's another thing that I would like to get into is, you're talking about screening and the processes that can go into taking care of these things. And Mariya touched on not knowing some people don't know the background of their family. That's the case for me as well. I'm not adopted, but I don't have any real awareness of past my grandparents, what the relatives in my bloodline and the genetic makeup that I carry, where that comes from. I don't know about any mental health history, and so I can't speak to that at all. And so it is important for me to acknowledge that I was consuming a lot of psychedelics, even though it was in ceremonial settings and it was for personal growth and spiritual practice and healing. It was also a lot, and I was working with a lot of different teachers. I didn't have one elder who was kind of supervising and who was mentoring me, and that's something I think Mariya can speak to a lot, the importance of that. But yeah, so it was something that, to get back to the original question, it was something that was just a very disorienting, scary process. It was very startling, and it just took me completely out of my reality and set me into a new world that I didn't know how to engage with, what to do with. So it was very unsettling and traumatic.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is super valuable, and there's a distinction here which is helpful as well for our listeners. So if it was a spectrum, this whole thing, the breaking open, then you would have been in the right, the intense side of it, as opposed to somebody who's having like a mini openings. It can be, right? So, and also thank you for taking that responsibility and saying that maybe you were overdoing this at the time. Yeah, that could. Is there evidence that this could also add to the why it happened, Mariya, or are we still at the very beginning of everything?
Yeah, there is, Lee is like anecdotal evidence, right? Like that is how we learn, right? That is how we talk about. It also sounds that, what I've been reading or hearing, the stress levels can definitely affect. So I think it's a combination. Again, this is just my opinion. Combination of stress and not only the amount of different plants, but what Lee is mentioning, what is important, like with different teachers, with different elders. It's really, like indigenous people, like my teachers would just say that the energies were just being crossed. Different plants, like from, in Vachuma and ayahuasca and coca, and like even non-psychoactive plants, right? Like they all have their spirits, they all have their energies. They have to be, dieted and respected, and then different teachers, because each time you drink with somebody, it's like they're kind of staying with you at least for some time. So you start having like a big party in your head where all of them meet, and all of those plants meet, and you amplify it by going through stressful times in your life. And that is a recipe for disaster. I usually, when people come, and they want to go on a retreat with me, something like that, I often there is a pull to solve a crisis with psychedelics. I'm like, this is not the medicine for the crisis. If you're going through something really intense, go through it. Like, don't try, don't try to shortcut yourself, through that portal. Go through it. Be it, sometimes it can be divorce, it can be death. And then once you're on the other side, once it's time to heal, and once there is space for it, that's when there could be a place for psychedelics. Again, keeping in mind, is just one of the ways. It's not a better way. There's many paths to the top of the mountain. Psychedelics is definitely not everybody's cup of tea. I don't advocate everybody working with them. It's just one of the ways, and it has pros and cons as any other modality.
Thank you so much. Look, there's a gold here, like the cross energy, because I always thought the facilitator was the main, it's like in the center of the process. And I always had that feeling. I've only apprenticed just a little bit with an indigenous person, and that was the takeaway for me, that you need to be absolutely careful with the facilitator, the teacher that you're working with. So that's really helpful, Mariya. And then the other thing is, unfortunately, in the West right now, like I get emails, sometimes floods our inbox saying, I'm in crisis, tell me where I can go and take medicine. And you just said, maybe you need to get over the other side first. So right now, people are actually shortcutting, taking the medicine in the midst of the crisis, right? So that's really helpful to know that too. I'm not sure if it will even be noticed or noticeable, because when people are in that desperate situation, as you can imagine, like this information just doesn't come in, and they will just continue seeking the shortcuts, right?
Yeah, and it can also lead to very drastic decisions, right? Like especially when you're in a crisis, you just want to get out of there, right? And sometimes you end up, yeah, making really drastic changes that perhaps you can regret later.
Yeah. If there's anything else you would like to add, we can always come back to it. But from here, I would like to open a thread where, okay, so in Lee's case, he needed intervention, right? He needed medical intervention. Lee, did you have somebody to look after you 24/7? Did they have to keep an eye on you since you weren't there?
Yes. So I'll give a little more information about these two different situations that I explained that I went through. The first time this happened to me, I was immediately consulted with and seen by a psychiatrist within 24 to 48 hours of this presenting itself to my friends and my partner as something was severely wrong and I was not connected with consensus reality. And in this case, this first incident, when this happened to me and this entered into my field as it was something that was possible to happen, I was not brought into a psychiatric ward or under psychiatric care until several days in. And so essentially this was endeavored to be controlled and keep things in a safe territory by my business partner, my friend, my partner, the psychiatrist. And so I was looked after under 24/7 care with the presence of a psychiatrist who came and went as needed, but mostly through the resources and the capacity to hold space for another, because this is exactly what I was doing, and the people I was working with was helping support ceremonial process retreats and ceremonial experiences like this. So the people I had around me were familiar with the general concept of holding space and accompanying, keeping someone safe. This was a new reality and circumstance for them, and so that's where very wisely there was the contact with a psychiatrist who consulted and looked after. And so after a few days, they brought me into a hospital. I was given an antipsychotic and a sedative, a tranquilizer, essentially, because I was not coming back to consensus reality. It was not improving my state, and I was not sleeping or eating or drinking water, or I was in serious condition just physiologically. And so I was hospitalized for a couple days, and then I had my contacts reach out to two brothers, indigenous brothers, who were facilitators of ceremonies that I had participated in. And they, one of the brothers, it was familiar with me. We had a personal relationship, and so he was there to support me, and they were a big part of the process in helping me come back in touch with reality again. And so in this first experience, it lasted about 2 weeks total when I started to things got wobbly and I was losing touch with reality. And then through until the point when I kind of came back to reality, so to speak. In the second situation where this happened, which was a few years after this first incident, this first situation, in the second situation, the same sort of thing I was in a ceremonial retreat setting. I was with people who were familiar, with holding space and being involved in therapeutic processes. I was with my partner at the time and with trusted people who knew us well, but again, they didn't have a lot of familiarity and experience personally directly with this exact type of process at this level of severity. And so there was no intervention from psychiatric help for the first few weeks. This was tried. They attempted to kind of keep things under control and take care of me and make sure it didn't get too dangerous or destructive for my process. And because it's difficult to gauge, this is exactly why we're wanting to talk about this more. It's difficult to gauge when to reach out for what certain type of more intensive help from other modalities or other healers, and when to intensify and scale up to the intervention that you're having. That assessing that situation is difficult to do. And so for a few weeks, I was kind of coming a little bit back and recovering and starting to make progress and eating and drinking and sleeping a little bit more, but it wasn't significant, and it kind of came and went. And so that's where it was a little more prolonged before I did have psychiatric intervention, where I was given a pharmaceutical antipsychotic. So I eventually was brought back through a medevac flight, through an emergency medical flight, to Minnesota and to the psychiatric system. Minnesota is where I grew up in the northern US. And so with the help of my family, with the help of loved ones there and my partner also, I was admitted into a psychiatric system there in Minnesota specifically. And it took me several months. It was several months of the same sort of kind of making a little progress, coming back, sort of more in touch with reality, but also in sort of a nebulous space, not really making dramatic, obvious progress in the identity of Lee and my return back to connecting with consensus reality again. That was very much more drawn out. And so I was treated through the psychiatric system, more through the lens of substance abuse, addiction to psychedelics was referenced essentially. Treated more as someone who was going through a psychedelic-induced psychosis. But I had been coming and going out of this state for many months, even after not using any psychedelics. And once I was in the psychiatric system, there were 3 different hospitalizations I was admitted to over the course of about 6 months after coming back from being medevaced from where I originally was. And so it was really difficult for them to understand how to interface and to care for me and who it was that they were, that they were trying to care for, the circumstances of how I got myself into this situation, how to assess where I was at. And so I was given a diagnosis of bipolar. I was first treated by a nurse practitioner who, through her consultation support, she essentially recommended to me and was prescribing a medication for bipolar that she was under the belief that I would need for the rest of my life and would be on. That's kind of how her course of treatment for me, what she had prognosticated. And so it was a big challenging process to kind of work through all the different nuances and steps and check all the boxes and fit into the categories and prescribe, put labels on everything, and navigating those 2 worlds, which are very different, but I think they can be complementary, like Mariya was touching on. She's a good example of that. People who can speak these different, her very literally speaking different languages and understanding how people work in different fields and settings, the different technologies and protocols, and also the different cultural backgrounds, the makeup of who a person is. I think Mariya in particular, her background, the travel she's done, all the people from so many different international backgrounds that she's worked with, it's really important being able to speak those different languages, engage with people on those different levels. And that's where a more comprehensive kind of holistic care can come in. And so that was something that I didn't really have in either case. It was also something I was just learning about, and everyone around me who was participating in helping care for me in those situations, they were learning about this for almost all of them for the first time, directly involved in supporting someone in this kind of situation. I don't know if that got back to your question entirely, but a little bit of kind of what that stimulated.
So helpful. So through you, it was almost like everybody involved learned so much. And what really jumped out was the referencing the addiction to psychedelics as well. Again, this is
actually, I was just looking at, sorry to cut you off, but I was just looking at, I received medical records. I've been getting some more information and just doctors' notes, the physicians and psychiatrists who treat, and that was actually when I was dispatched from the second hospitalization and allowed to return home and be under home care. That was the diagnosis that they sent me off with, is this is a peyote and ayahuasca abuse disorder is what they put as one of the diagnoses. Yeah.
It shows where we are. It shows where we are in this place right now, right? So it's so multifaceted, multi-layered, holistic care that it required, and this is why you guys are doing the event and the work that you do. So this is gold. Honestly, this is so important. And Mariya, what would you say? What helped Lee from your perspective? Because I know Lee said that you were there and kind of worked through things together. So what did you see how was it for you as somebody witnessing?
Actually, no, I wasn't there. Lee and myself, we were connected in the beginning of his journey. And I've learned about all of this actually way past after it happened. I learned also about it as a story, and it was, hair-raising account, honestly.
I can imagine.
And if anything, so I can't speak to what helped him much, but I think, this theme kind of has come up already, those independent kind of explorations with many teachers and, many plans. And in a way, I wish we were more connected. It was still the beginning of our friendship. We were not in constant touch because I personally would point out that this is a bit too much. And this is kind of like the message I think I want to bring out of Lee's story and everything that I'm seeing is that, well, maybe, 10, 15, 20 years ago, when people began on this path, there were no teachers, right? Well, there were indigenous teachers who didn't know about how we live, and there wasn't many people to whom you could go for advice, but it is available now. And this is not something that even needs to be seen as a teacher and a disciple. We can talk about even peer support, right? And supervision, which is a collegial relationship. To have somebody with whom you can regularly check in, not necessarily even learn from, I don't want to put hierarchy on it, but to have somebody with whom you can reflect, because, this path of learning psychedelics and experimenting, you can get lost, right? While having the best intentions, while still doing it in a respectful way, but without guidance, right? I believe we all need, right? When you go into the world of psychotherapy, well, we're required to have supervisors. So why not have that for every psychedelic practitioner, right? That is actually something where my work has transitioned a lot, and I feel very inspired. I mentor and coach lots of facilitators, like mushroom facilitators, ayahuasca, and I love also working with clinicians, right, and showing them that perspective, because we need to keep the medicine sacred. We need to keep those traditions, we need to learn from them. There's people who have been safely working with these plants for millennia, We can't just colonize that knowledge, come in and, say, well, now we administer it in white man in lab coats going to administer it in clinics for lots of money. Like we have to integrate, we have to acknowledge, and we have to learn from those cultures. So I believe that, if you are a clinician who's kind of coming from the clinical model, you should have, mentor from the traditional side, right? And somebody who is kind of gung-ho going down to Peru, well, you should also have a contact with whom you can consult on medication, contraindication, intake, right? Like we need to learn from each other, right? And we need to remember where this medicine is from, and that it's been used effectively and safely. Because this is, when, I find a lot of in the discourse of, advocating for clinical work, safety comes, well, this is safe. I'm like, well, it has been safely used in the forest for millennia, and that might be actually a safer way to do that sometimes. So yeah, that's kind of what's, so in a way, I wish I was around Lee more when he was going through that, but
yeah, it was just.
Yeah, I remember actually you reached out to me after the first episode that came up. I think just through kind of our community or through mutual connections or through sort of the mycelial network of the medicine world, you became aware that something had happened to me. And like you're saying, yeah, I think it's good to clarify. We weren't in often contact at that point in our relationship, and where I was just in my own journey. You were someone who I reached out to at times, and I still looked up to you a lot as a teacher, someone who I learned from, but you weren't, my mentor or the person who was kind of overseeing or supervising me in that sense. You were someone that I checked in with and gotten feedback from and looked to for information a lot of times, but it was very informal and infrequent at that point and in kind of our friendship. But just like you're saying, that those were some of the more important things for me, of starting to have just one person that I'm working with. For me, it came after my ceremonial participation and being involved in these medicines. And so it came through Western psychology. I would say my teacher is my psychologist, my therapist, it's just been in these last 2 years that I've been working with him. And that's kind of who is my go-to person now. And he's the person who, when I'm having big struggles or having a difficult time, I check in with him. He's kind of overseeing my process. And so that has been a big shift for me. And I think it is really important that you talk about that, and appreciate your perspective on it, Mariya. I don't know, Susan, you said you had some experience in apprenticing with indigenous elders. Have you heard about this coming up at all in indigenous context, or you're familiar already with that?
Yeah, I did, and I witnessed 2 cases in this way. And they had a very different approach to it. There's a lot of holding, there's a lot of caring, there's a lot of compassion, and then the holding continues on even months and weeks, as long as the person needs it. Without judgment, just knowing that this is a process, like calm down, no panic, just this is the process. We're just going to hold it, whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're just going to be there. That changed me as a person. Because in the way, I come from a psychotherapy background, and I was also very much like, you got a headache, you take a pill, and you get back onto doing what you need to do. And this was very different, and that really changed me and touched me, actually. So very, very coming back to what Mariya said, we can learn so much from this. And this is where we fall short. And look, I think we're learning. I think we're all now having these conversations, and it's in our awareness, and that is very optimistic and hopeful. Yeah. And so, Lee, checking in with someone, having someone there to ground you, to hold, to reflect is the most helpful, would you say?
Absolutely. Yes. And also echoing what you just expressed, that was, from what I do recall in my experiences, the most helpful presence and influence and support around me was the people who just held space. They went with the flow and didn't try and control or contain or provoke any sort of outcome. They were just simply accepting and allowing what was coming through me, and just in a way that was okay and accepting and reassuring and comforting, making sure that I was safe and just making sure that I was comfortable and able to go through and express what I was going through. So that came in the form of some nurses and different psychiatric context that I was in that came through some friends and some people who were holding space and just trying to be supportive more informally. That didn't come through as much with the psychiatrists and the actual physicians, although I do recall some clinicians and people involved in my different hospitalizations that did emit and have that presence a little bit more. But it was something that was very noticeable, and also something that I was given as feedback from my partner who was with me for this second experience, that she could tell anyone who engaged with me and confronted me when I was in that state, and I picked up on their fear, and they were someone who was unsure and not really on solid footing themselves and how they were approaching the situation. And she kind of witnessed me sort of attacking and going, in a more provocatory way to try and wreak havoc or sort of be the jokester and really sort of feeding into that energy where that fear was there. It provoked a different kind of response where there was more just acceptance and a calm reassurance. That was easier for me to be able to kind of let down my guard and just, the shadows and the difficult things that were coming through, to be able to just be with those things, express those things.
Wow. This is just so powerful. Thank you so much. Like these conversations, like a ceremony in itself, honestly, so valuable. And thank you for validating that, because that's always been my experience. As we approach somebody with fear and uncertainty and rigidity, they pick it up, right? I mean, even Mariya, you probably have tons of experience in this, even in the circles while people on medicine, usually they say, oh, the space is not held well. Well, because, the fear jumps around, right? It's there, visible. And this was so helpful. Thank you so much. So I know we're coming to the end of our conversation, but before I let you guys go, is there anything? I actually have a burning question, but I'm probably I'm not expecting you to answer it, and it's probably a whole nother conversation. So would you both say that there is intersections or overlapping commonalities between the psychedelic-induced psychosis as opposed to spontaneous psychosis that people have, would you say? That would be really interesting to kind of do that kind of cross-checking research on that.
It's an interesting question, Carl. I might bring it up in the actual seminar because I'm not the one who has the answer to that. And
maybe some of the clinical psychiatrists.
That's a great question. If I can borrow it from you, I'll bring it up during the seminar. Yeah,
please do. I'll be there, and I'll be there to support. And I'm very interested in to learn from the speakers. They're very interesting.
I do want to mention to anybody who is listening that we have a flexible payment structure available to make this learning accessible to everybody. So especially if you don't need an official certificate for continuing education credits, there is a sliding scale. You can choose your price, and even if it's not available to you, even within the suggested window, you can contact me. My email is listed there, and you wouldn't be turned away if, for example, you can't afford to pay anything.
Amazing. I really appreciate this. Education for all. I think this is so important. So we will put all the details in the show notes. We'll have both of your bios and the contact information, as well as the event information and email, Mariya. So that's 25th February, 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. That's Central Time, and then 1 p.m., 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll work it out from the UK, don't worry. We'll work it out and put it all in the show notes. So as a last question, what's the future holds for you both? Where do you go from here? What are you working on apart from this event, if you'd like to share? And lastly, where can they find you?
Lee, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So what I'm working on from here is actually mostly related to something really important to me, which is called the moon dance, which is a traditional ceremonial offering that comes from traditional Mexican teachers and abuelas who have have been doing this ritual, which is kind of related to the sun dance from North American tribes. And so this is a really big part of my personal practice and with my partner and my lifestyle. And so it's something that I'm investing a lot of time in and dedicating to and supporting. And that's something that's really important to me and looking forward to in this April. So going forward, that's a big part of what I'm working on and what's important to me. I'm available on social media through LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and X and all that. I'm not real active on any of them, but I'm able to be found on all of them just through my name, Lee Kaiser. So yeah, and I appreciate, Susan, you taking time to invite us on this conversation, share some of your interests and just call some attention to this topic. So, and thank you, Mariya, for taking time to contribute here as well.
Thank you, Lee. That's so wonderful. Thank you. We'll have all the details in the show notes as well for our friends to contact if they wish. Mariya, what's the future for you holding?
Well, we're going to see. I don't think, the direction of my work hasn't changed drastically in the last few decades. So I just see more and more of it unfolding. I really enjoy working one-on-one with people, like as a psychotherapist, using, indigenous knowledge and expressive art therapy and, everything, beyond talk therapy, I would say, getting deep into our feelings, subconscious. So I do enjoy working with my clients. And I also, as I already mentioned, I really enjoy supporting young facilitators in figuring out their path. I don't teach anybody how to do it. So I work with people who are already working in some capacity and providing support for that. So I also lead retreats to Peru every year. So I'm, available for that. And I'm always open. I'm always up for adventure. So I'm always up for any interesting kind of processes, projects. So yeah, it's not the beginning, but it's also not the end.
I love that. And they can find you at mariyagarnet.com as well, right?
Yeah. And if you're listening, because I spell Mariya differently, so people miss me sometimes. Mariya. Yeah. And I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook,
LinkedIn,
I'm on all the
and
social.
LinkedIn. That's
yes,
where I
that's
saw
how
you.
we met.
Yeah. LinkedIn is great. LinkedIn is, I mean, out of all these platforms, no red flags so far. We can talk about psychedelics, which is great news, and connect with amazing people. So yes, I know that you're there. We'll add all those links in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. It has been so learning wise, it's been an absolute gold. Looking forward to supporting the event and learning more and meeting other speakers and healers and indigenous teachers as well. And one of the things that we do here in this podcast platform is to reinvite our guests, continue building relationship, friendship, and then maybe in the future we'll have you individually to talk more deeper into your own passions, maybe together, let's see. But would love to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting us and for having us and for having this conversation.
Thank you for you both. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Please do share, comment, ask questions, feedback, whatever feels right. Don't be shy. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.